everyone. This is the second lesson in our course, Psychological Assessment. Today we're going to talk about the legal and ethical consideration in psychological assessment. So we have two topics for today. We're going to look at the rights of the test takers as well as the ethical standards and procedures in psychological assessment. So, silipin natin kung ano ang mga karapatan ng isang test takers, isang test taker. So, we can divide, we can say that we have the test takers have at least four basic rights while they are taking the test and after they took the test or after they have gone through psychological assessment. So these are the rights of informed consent, the right to be informed of testing findings, the right to privacy and confidentiality, and the right to the least stigmatizing label. Okay, so titignan natin yan isa-isa. So pag sinabi mong the right of informed consent, may karapatan yung test taker to know kung bakit, number one, siya ine-evaluate, how the test data will be, saan gagamitin yung data na makukuha, at kanino to i-release. So ito yung basic na kailangan niya malaman. Dapat alam niya kung bakit siya nagte-test, dapat alam din niya kung para saan yung testing, at dapat alam niya kung kanino i-release yung results ng test. Also, kailangan itong consent na makuha natin being the test conductor sa isang test taker, kailangan ano yan, kailangan written yan at hindi oral. Hindi yan pwedeng pumayag lang siya tapos oral lang, or hindi pwedeng oral lang siya pumayag, kailangan written yan. Nakasama dito sa written form ay number one, yung general purpose of the test, yung specific reasons it's being undertaken, yung general type of instruments to be administered. So these are the things that the test taker should know in order to make an informed decision of whether or not he or she is going to go under psychological testing. So before psych testing starts, before you administer test to the test taker, kailangan alam niyo 'tong mga bagay na 'to. Yung informed consent cannot happen after the test. Kailangan bago siya mag-test, ibigay yung informed consent. Okay. Number two, meron din siyang karapatan dun sa test findings niya. In the past, there was a practice of not releasing yung yung results ng psychological test. Then what happened in the what happened much later pero in the past pa rin, naging practice naman yung i-release lang yung yung positive results doon sa participant, doon sa test taker. Ang worry kasi ng maraming practitioners ng assessment ay baka magkaroon ng adverse psychological effect pagka nabasa ng participant or ng test taker yung negative results niya. However, hindi na itong nagbago ng lahat itong mga to. Hindi lang, or rather required na hindi lang yung positive result ang ilalabas. So, meron ng karapatan yung test taker to be informed in the language they can understand, yung nature of the findings with respect to any test that they have taken. So, kasama yung findings, kailangan na may access sila doon sa findings at alam nila yung nature ng findings doon sa language na alam nila. Okay, pangalawa, entitled din sila na malaman yung lahat ng recommendations at yung mga recommendations na nakasulat doon sa kanyang assessment as a consequence of the test data. So, ano din niya yun, karapatan din niya yun na mabasa kung ano yung mga recommendations na nakasulat doon. Kasi this could actually lead for self-improvement and self-development. Also, Kung sakasakali na maging void ah, yung result, yung findings, or yung recommendations, kailangan may karapatan din yung test taker na malaman kung bakit ito nangyari, kung bakit void, kung bakit hindi na pwedeng gamitin. So, ayun, number one, may right yan, may right to informed consent, may right to be informed of the test findings, tapos may right din to privacy and confidentiality, which means that uh, pwede nating hiwa-hiwalay yung privacy, meron tayong tinatawag na private right. And this recognizes the freedom of the individual to pick and choose for himself if the time, circumstances, and particularly the extent to which he wishes to share or withhold from others his attitudes, belief, and opinion. So lahat tayo meron yung hindi lang yung test taker, lahat tayo ay meron ganitong right, meron tayong private right. We can choose to we can choose at our most convenient time kung anong attitudes, beliefs, behaviors, and opinions lang ang papakita natin. Also, meron tayong tinatawag na privileged information. These are information protected by the law from being disclosed in legal proceeding. This protects the client from disclosing in judicial proceedings. Privilege belongs to the client and not to the psychologist. So, yung information na nandun sa psych report ng isang tao ay tungkol yun sa client. So yung disclosure in a judicial proceeding ay nandun sa client at hindi doon sa psychologist. Okay? And lastly, in some rare cases, if the psychologist may, or rather, parang tong exception to sa privileged information, that in some rare instances, the psychologist may ethically, if not legally, uh, be compelled to disclose information if the information will prevent harm either to the client or to some endangered third party. Halimbawa, doon sa psych assessment ng isang client na tuklasan or tama na natuklasan ng natuklasan ng isang psychologist mula doon sa psych testing at syempre sa assessment na mataas yung kanyang suicide yung mataas yung kanyang suicide risk. So in such cases where uh, where disclosure can prevent harm to the person's life, compelled ethically, if not legally, yung isang psychologist na i-disclose ito. So, pwedeng i-disclose ng isang psychologist yung information kung sakaling it can protect someone's life or prevent harm to another person's life. Lastly, merong right to the least stigmatizing label. So, yung standards natin advise that the least stigmatizing label should always be assigned when reporting test results. So there was a time where such words such as feeble-minded, morons were accepted in psychological testing, pero lipas na yung mga ganong panahon. Ngayon, meron na tayong tinatawag na person-first language. Okay? So, instead of calling someone moron, feeble-minded, or even mentally retarded, ang ginagamit na natin ngayon ay blank with intellectual disability. Halimbawa, a child with intellectual disability. In fact, in mental retardation na term ay hindi na pine-prescribe ng DSM-5. So you are now required to use the term intellectual disability as a replacement to mental retardation. But now, you might say these are only terms. For you, they might only be terms kasi hindi ikaw yung hindi ikaw yung recipient or hindi ikaw yung nag-go under ng psychological test. Ask yourself, how would you feel like kung ganito ka demeaning and degrading yung words na mababasa mo as descriptors of your as your descriptors, 'di ba hindi 'di ba masakit 'yon? Mabasa halimbawa na ikaw ay moron or feeble-minded. Hindi ba ano 'to, hindi ba nakakasira ng dangal kung halimbawa kung halimbawa kumuha ka na ng psychological test, and yung test na yon ay papasa sa school. Hindi ba ito ay demeaning? Hindi ba ito ay uh, detrimental doon sa reputation ng isang tao? So when we write our psychological assessment, it's important to note that the client or the test taker has the right to the least stigmatizing label. Again, the least stigmatizing label. Okay, so these are the four rights of the test takers. Okay, so tignan naman natin kung ano yung ethical standards and procedures in psychological assessment. Now, this is based from the Section 7 of the Psychology Association of the Philippines Code of Ethics. So, nandun ito, yung ethical standards and procedures in psychological assessment. So, we have to start kung ano nga ba yung basis ng assessment. Uh, so, yung expert opinion that psychologists provide through the recommendation reports and diagnostic or evaluative statements are based on substantial information and appropriate assessment techniques. So dapat yung opinions na ibibigay, yung recommendations, yung reports, yung diagnostic and evaluative statements are laging based on substantial information at doon sa appropriate na assessment techniques. Walang ibang basihan ng opinions doon sa assessment, walang ibang basihan ng recommendations, ng report, ng diagnostic and evaluative statement, kung hindi yung appropriate assessment techniques at saka substantial information. Dapat laging may basihan. Dapat hindi pwedeng ano lang, hindi pwedeng base lang sa opinion mo, feel mo lang, hindi pwedeng ganoon ano. Kailangan merong may substance, kailangan merong proof yung sinasabi mo or may evidence yung sinasabi mo, and this evidences, itong proofs na to ay manggagaling dun sa assessment techniques. Number two, we provide expert opinion regarding the psychological characteristics of a person only after employing adequate assessment, procedures, and examinations to support our conclusion and recommendations. Ibig sabihin, you can only give out conclusions or pagkatapos mong gumamit ng adequate assessment procedures. Hindi ka pwedeng mag-jump into conclusion. Hindi mo pwedeng sabihin, nakita ko na to before base sa aking years of experience, ganito ito. We have to understand that even experts, even authorities can make mistakes. And the mistakes that we make with regards to assessment ay merong implication sa buhay ng ibang tao. So we have to be careful, and we have to practice rigor na yung ating ilalabas na opinion ay base sa ilalabas nating opinion tungkol sa psychological characteristic ng isang tao ay base sa adequate assessment at saka sa adequate assessment, and will only be released pagkatapos ng testing. Number three, in instances when we are asked to provide opinion about an individual without conducting an examination on the basis of review of existing test and report or test results and reports, we discuss the limitations of our opinion and the basis of our conclusion and recommendation. Totoo naman na there will be cases where the person already has an existing psychological report and psychological test or psychological tests, and there are cases where a psychologist will be asked to comment to provide opinions based on this test. Hindi siya yung I hope may understanding tayo na hindi siya yung nagbigay ng test in this situation. kailangan yung limitations should always be discussed. And kailangan yung opinions, yung limitations ng opinions, yung conclusion and recommendation ay laging i-discuss nung psychologist. Now, sabi natin may right yung test taker to inform consent, and syempre kailangan din nasa ethical guidelines yan, or sorry, nasa ethical consideration yan. Number one, we gather informed consent prior to the assessment of our clients except for the following instances. So bakit may exception? We always have to start at a standpoint na required ang informed consent. Pero merong mga exceptions yan. Okay, ano yung exceptions na? Number one, when it is mandated by the law for the person to be assessed psychologically, hindi kailangan ng consent. Number two, when it is implied such as in routine educational, institutional, and organizational activity. Kung halimbawa, yung quizzes, yung um, pre-test at saka post-test na ginagawa ng teachers before they start and after the lesson. Yung examinations, yung periodic examinations, hindi na kailangan ng ng informed consent. Ano pa? Kung halimbawa for promotion, or itong NCE, itong NCAE, itong mga to ay hindi na kinukuhaan ng informed consent kasi these are routine educational and institutional activities. Okay. So, also pagka yung purpose ay para ma-determine kung kumusta yung the decisional capacity ng isang kliyente. Okay? Imagine this, mahirap kunin or mahirap mag-assume na yung isang tao ay may capability na magbigay ng informed consent kung ang purpose ng testing ay pag-determine kung kaya niya magdesisyon ng maayos. Okay? So in those cases, hindi kinukuhaan ng informed consent. In many cases, dun sa last na situation, kadalasan yung magulang yung nagbibigay if the person is under 18 or if the person belongs to a special group or a special population. So, number two, we educate our clients about the nature of our service, financial arrangements, potential risks, and limitations of confidentiality. So, ano yung limitations ng confidentiality? Pinag-usapan natin to dun sa rights ng test taker, ano? So, in instances where our clients are not competent to provide informed consent on assessment, we discuss these matters with their immediate family members or legal guardians. So, if in case na it was it was or if in cases where it came up that the person has no capacity to provide or not competent enough to provide informed consent, halimbawa dun sa bullet 3 sa number 1, kailangan mong i-discuss yung nature of the service, yung financial arrangement, yung potential risks, at saka limitations ng confidentiality to the person's immediate family member or kung wala, sa kanyang legal guardian. Number 3, in instances where a third-party interpreter is needed, the confidentiality of the test results and the security of the test must be ensured. The limitations of the obtained data are discussed in our results, conclusion, and recommendation. So, with regards to assessment tool, we have to judiciously select and administer only those tests which are pertinent to the reasons for referral and purpose of assessment. So, kung ano lang ang reason for assessment or purpose for assessment or for referral, ganun lang yung pipiliin mong test ay doon lang magbabase. Halimbawa, ang referral ay feeling ng teacher ay merong self-esteem issues yung isang bata, kaya mababa yung kanyang motivation to study, to work. So yun lang yung scope dapat ng test na pipiliin mo. Self-esteem, self-efficacy kung kasama, motivation, grit, hindi na siguro kasama kung siya ay depressed, hindi na siguro susukatin kung or hindi na siguro gagamit ng DASS dyan or ng ibang test na sumusukat ng mga constructs na labas noong self-esteem, nalabas noong self-efficacy at saka motivation. Only tests that measure those constructs are pertinent dun sa are pertinent dun sa referral. So kahit na halimbawa ikaw ay may research sa sa suicide, hindi mo pwedeng ibigay doon sa referred student yung test na yon at gamiting excuse na na-refer siya kasi sa referral pa lang ang purpose ay or rather yung purpose ng referral ay sukatin yung tatlong bagay na yun, hindi kasama yung suicide or depression or anxiety or whatever. Number two, we use data collection methods and procedures that are consistent with current scientific and professional developments. So kailangan lagi yung gagawing method of assessment ay consistent dun sa scientific belief, sa principle of causality, sa paggamit sa ideas ng determinism at saka ng empiricism na lagi mayroong scientific rigor yung gagawin mo. We have to understand that psychological assessment is actually a scientific practice. So, kailangan laging sumunod doon sa scientific guidelines at saka professional development. Number three, we use tests that are standardized, valid, reliable, and has a normative data directly referable to the population of the student. So dito po pasok yung issue na kung applicable nga ba yung test sa isang tao. So we have to before giving the test, we have to look at kung yung validity ng test, yung reliability ng test, at kung may existing norms doon sa population ng client yung test na yon. It's difficult to assume na yung halimbawa norms for depression sa isang population is directly applicable as norms for a different population. So as much as possible, before we give out the test, kailangan merong existing norms. Kung walang existing norms, you have several choices. Look for norms that look for standardized test na merong norms doon sa local population, or what you can do is look for locally developed test kasi ang assumption natin ay yung norms nito kadalasan ay dun sa local population. So, hindi ka pwedeng magsabing wala akong mahanap so okay na to. Hindi scientific yung paniniwala na yon, hindi scientific yung ganung practice. You have to consider yung reliability, yung validity, tsaka normative data, at saka yung normative data ay dapat directly applicable doon sa population ng referred client. Number four, we only administer tools that are appropriate to the language, competence, and other relevant characteristics of the client. Halimbawang English yung test at hindi competent in English yung student, hindi pwedeng ibigay yung test dun sa tao. Iba sigurong test ang appropriate. Siguro ang appropriate ay culture fair test or halimbawa Filipino speaker yung bata pero at zero English yung sa kanya, siguro appropriate yung mga locally developed test na nasa Filipino language. So, nagkaroon din kasi dito ng issues, halimbawa yung when we were colonized by the Americans, they gave out assessment kasi bagong concept sa kanila yung IQ, yung testing, yung assessment. So excited silang gamitin din in other populations na ng mga bansa na sinakop nila. And when they measured yung IQ natin, or when they measured the IQ of early Filipinos, it was found out na napakababa nung IQ nila compared to Americans. Ang problema ay yung culture, yung language ay hindi appropriate for Filipinos. Halimbawa, there were items like how many pennies are there in a dollar. So, paano paano malalaman ng Filipinos na ito ay commonsensical questions para sa isang Amerikano, pero para sa isang Pilipino, it doesn't apply kasi walang pennies and dollars sa atin, sa culture natin. So in selecting test, kailangan appropriate yung language, appropriate din yung culture. So with regards to obsolete and outdated test results, we do not base our interpretation, conclusions, and recommendations on outdated test results. Pangalawa, hindi rin tayo gumagamit ng obsolete tests. So, magkaiba yan. Pag sinabi mong outdated test results, uh, posibleng gumamit ng up-to-date na test, pero yung actual results or yung report ay hindi na updated. Posibleng this was done in the past like 4 or 5 years ago or 6 years ago na hindi na up-to-date doon sa posibleng current level of functioning ng tao, current level of psychological health ng tao. So we do not base our interpretations and conclusion on outdated test results. Pangalawa, we do not provide interpretations and conclusion and recommendations on the basis of obsolete tests. Maraming obsolete tests na nandyan yung Guilford-Zimmermann or yung Blackie picture test, pero may mga existing test din na outdated na yung version or obsolete na yung version. Halimbawa, yung WISC, yung version ng WISC na natin ngayon ay yung 5th edition, hindi na appropriate na gamitin yung 3rd or yung 2nd or yung 1st edition nito. Pwede mo nang i-consider na obsolete na yung versions ng test. We're not saying na obsolete na yung WISC, ang sinasabi natin, obsolete na yung versions, kailangan na ng updated ones. So hindi ka pwedeng mag-provide ng interpretation, conclusion, and recommendation based on this obsolete tests and obsolete test versions. So, with regards to interpreting assessment results, in fairness to our clients, under no circumstances should we report the client that the test result without taking into consideration the validity, reliability, and appropriateness of the test. We should therefore indicate our reservations regarding the interpretation. Halimbawa, it was found out or rather you found out that while a particular test is has high reliability score sa isang population, pero mababa pala yung reliability ng test sa current or dun sa population noong client mo, isusulat mo ito. Kailangan mong i-report na yung test reliability ng specific na test na yon ay mababa para doon sa population. At ano yung limitations nito? Also, we interpret assessment results while considering the purpose of the assessment and other factors such as the client test-taking abilities, characteristics, situational and personal and cultural differences. So, hindi black and white yung lalabas na results. We have to, in writing our assessment, we have to consider yung purpose ng assessment, pati yung factors like yung test-taking ability ng bata. Halimbawa, you are giving out an IQ test to someone with special needs. Kailangan pati yun ay tinitake into consideration yung characteristics niya, yung ability niya to take the test. Sometimes there are people who receive low scores in IQ test or in achievement test, hindi dahil mababa yung achievement or yung IQ nila, but rather yung test-taking abilities nila. halimbawa maikli yung patience nila in sitting down and taking the test, maikli din yung kanilang attention span nila. So kailangan ito ay kino-consider din. So, in release of test, it's our responsibility to ensure that test results and interpretations are not used by persons other than those explicitly agreed upon by the referred sources prior to the assessment procedures. Hindi pwedeng gamitin ng ibang tao yung psychological assessment result, yung psych report ng isang client kung hindi siya kasama doon sa previously agreed upon list of people na pwedeng gumamit nitong test na to. Halimbawa yung purpose of assessment ay para sa isang job na ina-applyan mo. Ang may access dito dapat ay yung napag-agreean ninyo ng ang may access lang ay yung siyempre yung company no, yung company kung saan ikaw ay nag-a-apply, yung onboarding staff ng company na yon, at saka yung siyempre yung nagbigay ng assessment sa iyo. Hindi pwede na ibigay halimbawa may isa pang company na nagkaroon ng access doon sa iyong psych report. Hindi pwedeng gamitin yung report na yon ng company 2 kasi yung report na or rather yung assessment or rather na pag-agreean ninyo nung test taker at saka noong kumpanya, sila lang ang may access doon sa results ng test. Hindi pwedeng ibang tao ang magkaroon ng access after the fact. Halimbawa, hindi pwedeng bigla na lang ibibigay sa ibang tao yung psych assessment mo. Number 2, we do not release test data in the form of raw and scaled scores, client response to test questions or stimuli, and notes regarding the client's statements and behaviors during the examination unless regulated by the court. Unless regulated by the court, hindi pwede kang mag-release ng raw data, ng scaled scores or nung notes na sinulat mo tungkol dun sa observations mo dun sa client. Hindi pwede yon. Kailangan sa end ng client, sa end nung if there's a third party asking for the result, ang third party asking for assessment, kailangan na nakalagay doon sa report mo ay consolidated na yung result, hindi pwedeng raw yung data na ibibigay mo. Okay, so with regards to explaining assessment results, we release test results only to the source of referral and with a written permission from the client if it's a self-referral. So kailangan halimbawa ang nag-seek ng assessment ay yung guidance counselor, dun lang sa guidance counselor mo ibibigay yung test results. Hindi pwedeng doon sa principal or halimbawa sa HR halimbawa for promotion yung reason for referral, hindi pwedeng at yung HR ang nag-request ng assessment, hindi po pwedeng ibigay ito dun sa immediate supervisor ng tao kasi again, yung results should only be released to the source of referral. Kung hindi kasama sa sources of referral yung immediate supervisor ng tao, hindi pwedeng siya sa kanya ibibigay. Okay? So, number 2, when test results have to be communicated to relatives, parents, or teachers, we explain them through non-technical language. Kung halimbawa ibibigay ito sa mga taong hindi well versed sa technical language, hindi well versed sa jargons ng psychological assessment, kailangan i-explain ito in a non-technical language na maiintindihan ng taong i-communicate mo yung results. Pangatlo, we explain findings and test results to our client or designated representative except when the relationship precludes the provision of explanation of results and it is explained in advance to the client. So, yung findings ay i-explain doon sa client or kung meron siyang designated representative. Except kung yung relationship noong uh, yung relationship nila ay ang tawag dito ay makaka-influence dun sa provision ng explanation of the results. Okay, so when test results need to be shared with school social agencies, the courts or industry, we supervise such release. So hindi pwedeng i-send lang, kailangan yung psychologist who did the assessment, kailangan i-supervise na yung pag-transfer noong information nung psych report papunta dun sa receiving agency, kung ito ay court or industry or school. With regards to test security, we release the test result only to the source of referral and with the written permission from the client if it is a self-referral. So, laging paulit-ulit natin sinasabi because napaka-importante ng test security. Hindi po pwedeng i-take for granted itong test security na to. Napaka-importante noong confidentiality, ng privacy ng client natin. So we have to reiterate this over and over again that it's important for us to supervise yung transfer nung test results, ng psych report, and it's also important for us to only release the results doon sa source of referral. So, letter I is assessment by unqualified persons. We do not promote the use of assessment tools and methods by unqualified persons except for training purposes with adequate supervision. So if it's for training purposes, educational purposes, pwede only when there is adequate supervision. Also, we ensure that the test protocols, their interpretations, and all other records are kept secured from unqualified persons. So wala dapat access yung mga unqualified persons dun sa test results. Hindi po pwedeng, halimbawa, may kaibigan ka na mag-entrance test, sabi sa'yo, pwede ko bang basahin yung test results o yung pwede ko bang hiramin yung isang mong IQ test kasi magpa-practice ako, susubukan ko kung gano'n. Hindi siya applicable. Number one, hindi na pa-practice hindi dapat pina-practice yung IQ test. Number two, ayon sa ethics natin, hindi dapat wala dapat access yung unqualified persons sa mga test protocols at saka sa interpretation. Okay? So masisira yung masisira syempre yung anong tawag dito, yung reputation ng test, magkakaroon ng test decay kasi nagkaroon ng access ang general population. So these tests are kept from the general public para maprotektahan yung integrity ng test, So para maging applicable pa rin yung test na yun. Imagine kung ibibigay natin sa general public yung test tapos may access na silang lahat. So babasahin na nila, pwede na sila mag-prepare para dun sa test. Masisira yung purpose ng testing. So, lastly, we develop tests and other assessment tools using current scientific findings and knowledge, appropriate psychometric properties, validation, and standardization procedures. There are cases where psychologists and other researchers and other scientists will create tests. So, importante na yung pag-create ng test ay sumusunod sa current scientific findings, sa guidelines natin sa pag-create ng test. Hindi pwedeng mag-shortcut at kailangan merong appropriate psychometric properties, validation, and standardization. Susunod ito sa standardization procedures. You will know more about this because you will be constructing your own test in this course. So this ends our lesson on the legal and ethical considerations in psychological assessment. Thank you for listening.